Hey everybody, thanks for joining us in the webinar. Today I'd like to introduce Brodie once again. We've been doing monthly webinars, just adding value to our clients. And he has helped me build my business over the years and transformed it into an investment. It's given me like a lot more insight on how things work and how to take my business to the next level. Today, it's going to be about the cash flow quadrant, but not just from the Robert Kiyosaki perspective, but in a financial perspective using investments and such and such. And so it's been really important to help me see how to allocate assets in a more financially wise way, and has especially for business owners who aren't very familiar with how to maximize their corporation and their what to do with taxes and so forth. And so today I'm super excited to have Carl to share with you these strategies and these tips. So over to you, Carl.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Gary. So today I would like to focus, as Gary mentioned, on the cash flow quadrant. But it's going to be a little bit different from what you might be used to when you read Robert Kiyosaki. Robert Kiyosaki, I think, is really focused on the cash flow quadrant from a business perspective. Because I come from the finance industry, I'm really going to focus on the financial aspects of the cash flow quadrant and not kind of speaking generally about it, but really getting into the specifics of how we can move from employee, as you'll see in a few minutes, all the way to investor, which is really the end that we want to get to when we're dealing with cash flow quadrants. So I'm going to share my screen. And we can go through it. So the cash flow quadrants, just in case you're not familiar with the cash flow quadrants, or just in case it's been a little while, I'm just going to quickly go through what the cash flow quadrants are. So everybody starts as employees. Well, mostly everybody starts as employees anyway. So you're working at maybe a guitar shop, and then over time, some people move to self-employed. So you're no longer working at a guitar shop, you're running your own guitar shop, selling your own guitars. And then over time, hopefully, we move from employed to self-employed, and then over to business owner. And when we're a business owner, essentially what we've done is we've created not only a job for ourselves, but we've created a business that's operating on its own. So we've likely got our own employees at that point. And that business, we've got systems in place so that business really is running itself. So in the end, what we really want is to be an investor. So what that might look like is us as an investor. And we might have our business or multiple other types of investments, all providing us with some kind of cash flow. So this is what we want to get to eventually. We want to get to a place where we're an investor. Most of us are starting here, and this is probably the easiest jump from employee to self-employed. It gets a little bit more difficult to get to the business stage, and then it's quite difficult to get to the investor stage. So how can we actually do this in such a way that's almost automated? How can we move from this stage to this stage to this stage in a more automated way, so it's not as difficult as it can be for a lot of people to move through those stages? That's what I want to cover today. So I'd like to start with a case study. So we've got Jessica. And Jessica did exactly that. She started as an employee at a guitar shop. So she was very good at the guitar and was able to give lessons at the same time. So because of all her skills, she was able to open a business. And that business, so she became self-employed. And so she was able to sell guitars and she was able to give the lessons. So essentially what she did, and this is not anything that this is not my insight, but this is just Robert Kiyosaki's. She moved from being employed by somebody else to being employed by herself. So her position didn't really change that much. She's really still an employee, but she's not the employee of somebody else. So it's still an important step, but she hasn't freed herself from being an employee at this point, right? So the issue is Jessica was making pretty good money. She was making $100,000 a year in profits from what she was doing. But her problem was that $100,000 is pretty well what she needed to live every year. Everybody knows what it's like to live in Vancouver or the Lower Mainland. We need about $100,000 to live. So she'd make the $100,000 in the business, and that $100,000 would go to living expenses. There would be some money that went to expenses of the business, but this is her net profits out of the business and the money that she needed personally to live. So she was essentially, if we look back at the business cycle here, she was stuck here because she didn't have any money to expand the business. She didn't have any money for investments. She was just in a situation where the money was just flowing through and going to expenses here and living expenses personally. So she got stuck here. So when I talked to her, we looked at a way that she would be better able to move to the next level. And the way we do that is we start to capture some of this money in cash flow. So Jessica, again, what we did is we made a corporation. So Jessica now has her guitar business as a separate corporation. So Jessica owns this corporation. Now that $100,000 is going into here. And we're capturing that $100,000 in an investment inside the corporation. And then when she pulls her salary, she pulls that salary out of that $100,000. So now she's able to capture, and actually that's going back up to her as her living expenses. So now, even though, and that's $100,000 coming out, just so that's clear. Even though she's only got enough money coming in the corporation to pay herself out, she's starting to capture some of that money in an investment and pay out that money to herself through a loan, through the corporation. So she's using the power of leveraging, or another way to put it is other people's money to be able to start to save money within that corporation. So the question is, okay, we're starting to save money within the corporation. How does that actually let us move to the next level? So there are a few ways that helps us, and I'm going to redraw that so that we can refer to it where it's a little more convenient. So we've got that E, that's past history for Jessica. So now we're at the S. What does she need to do to move to the next level, B? Any ideas of what you think she needs to do to move to the next level?
So some might say like Jessica needs to open other guitar shops.
Mm-hmm.
That's one option.
Yeah, so she might want to either open more shops. So here's Jessica. Maybe she wants business number 1, business number 2. Maybe she wants to open more shops. That's one option. Maybe she wants to take on some employees within that business. So she is actually more turning into a management role and less just employing herself. So for either one of these, if she wants to open other shops or she wants to take on more employees, essentially what she needs is capital. So she needs a way to grow capital within her corporation. So what we've done essentially in creating that investment, as that investment continues to grow over time, we can start to use some of that surplus capital. There we go. So as the investment continues to grow, we can use some of that surplus capital either to pay salaries for employees or for some kind of capital expenditure like other businesses or other shops. Probably shops is a better way to put it. So as a result, she's growing her cash flow and she's able to get into a more management position. And eventually moving herself out of the business completely, right? And once she's moved herself out of the business completely, then she becomes an investor.
Hey,
So-
Carl, can you recap that part? How did she get from S to B? Like, so you said the corporation, the investment income increases, and then
Yeah. So essentially what she's doing, as she right here, really, when you're in the self-employed, you are both the owner of the business and the sole employer of the business.
Correct.
Right? So the vicious circle you can find yourself in is that you're self-employed, all that money from the self-employed has to go to you as an employee. And then the money that you make on yourself as an employee just kind of goes back to yourself as an employee, back into the business, pays you as an employee. And you're in this vicious circle where 100% of the funds are just being used as you as an employee. You pay it back to the business, gets used by you, paid back to the business. You're not getting anywhere, right? So what we've done is we've created some surplus within the business, which you are no longer generating. That's being generated by the investment within the business.
I see.
So as a result, over time, you're no longer in this vicious circle. Now you can maybe bring on one employee. Or as you mentioned, Gary, now you can add one more shop. So now you're in a situation where you're increasing the capital down here, you're increasing the cash flow that you're generating. So you can actually move into a situation where you can expand the business and you're not the sole generator of income within the business. It's either this employee or it's that second business that is now starting to generate more income. Okay, so basically use this investment for a little bit of an extra boost, an extra source of income so that you could start to fund your movement from the S quadrant over to the B quadrant. And of course, the last quadrant is investment. So what you want to do, and sorry, I'll draw that again so you can see how this works. So employee, self-employed, business. It got a little messy up at the top. What you want to do ultimately is move to this I. And what we're doing as an I person, again, Jessica has this one business. She also wants other investments, right? So essentially, number one, we need to turn this business into an investment. So as she becomes a business owner, and becomes less and less involved in the day-to-day operations of the business, she no longer is even part of the management when she moves to this I quadrant. Now all she's doing is getting the cash flow from the government, or sorry, as a business, as an investor. So when we move to that I quadrant, essentially what we want our corporation to be is an investment. So that investment that we put into the business here, over time, can become more and more part of the cash flow generation of the business. So what we'll do over time is we can use this investment and the money that it's generating either to pay Jessica directly, or we can continue to generate other investments within the business, or even outside of the business. Maybe we invest in other people's corporations or other passive investments so that we can start to build Jessica a situation where she's got multiple sources of cash flow and she's moved fully into that investor segment of ESBI, the cash flow quadrants. So the whole idea is, generally speaking, we don't completely understand the power of our own cash flow, because often the way it works is we've got a business. Well, really, we've got the work of an employee that's generating money. So in Jessica's case, again, she was self-employed, but she was still the generator of the money for the business. So we've got that employee generating money. Again, in Jessica's case, it was $100,000 being generated by that employee. And then we just use that money to fund the lifestyle of the person who's actually doing the work. So what we want to do is, instead of that cash flow just going back into the employee and continually being reinvested fully in the lifestyle of supporting that employee, we want to capture that cash flow. We want to use the power of the cash flow to build us something. And the way to do that is to invest that cash flow and then borrow the money that's going back to the employee. And then this continues to grow for us. So now we've got a growing asset. Instead of this vicious circle where all you're doing is funding the lifestyle of the employee. Now you've got a real tangible asset within the business, which is growing for you.
So Carl, probably what's going on in people's minds are, oh, what can I invest in that would create a surplus inside the corporation where I can borrow against it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I'll go through that. So there are a number of different assets that you can put into a corporation and you can borrow from. And what I'd like to do is compare them and let you see my thinking process of why I would choose one asset over the others. So I'm just going to draw a quick chart here. Or slow chart, we'll see. So here's a quick chart, and we'll just compare some assets. So what are a few things? Anybody can think of anything that would be important if you were going to borrow against an asset? What would be some important things about that asset? Like, for example, would you want to borrow against a crypto coin like Luna? Is anybody doing that? Is there anybody out there in the audience right now or on the Zoom who's doing that? So, and the reason for that is it's not very stable, right? So stability is going to be one thing that's going to be important if we're borrowing money against something, right?
Mhm.
So another thing that will be important to us is how much we can borrow. So if there's something like stocks, we can borrow probably around 50% on our stocks. That's probably not going to be enough in this case because we're going to take $100,000. We're going to put $100,000 in. We're only going to have $50,000 to go back to our employee. So it didn't really work for us that well, right? So we want to make sure that we can get 100% loan to value, LTV. I would suggest we're probably going to want some kind of reasonable rate of return. Again, there's a contrast through to something like Luna or all the way on the other side, cash. So Luna potentially could have made you a lot of money, right? Because it's a very volatile, potentially high return asset. Something like cash, our issue is that it doesn't really make you. It makes you 0 to 1% rate of return, right? So if we wanted to build a surplus here, we're not going to be able to do it with cash because we don't have enough of a return. And then we probably want it to be tax-free. So those are the most important categories I would think of when we're thinking of leveraging something within our corporation for this kind of strategy. So number one, we might look at something like stocks. So stocks, I would probably say they're not super stable. You can't get 100% loan to value. You probably could get the rate of return that you wanted over time. They're not tax-free. If we looked at cash, we get a good check mark on the stability. We can probably get 100% loan to value on cash. We're probably not going to get the rate of return, and it's not tax-free. If we look at something like insurance, and this is the one that I would recommend, we've got the stability. We've got 100% loan to value. We've got a rate of return, probably not going to be as high as stocks. We're probably looking at something like a 4% rate. And we've got the tax-free. So I would recommend for something like this, that something like an insurance would be a very good asset class to have within the corporation to leverage against. Something like stocks or cash, I don't think it makes sense. And there's crypto. Maybe we'll look at a couple others. Crypto, we don't have the stability. We can't get 100% loan to value. We may have the rate of return, not tax-free. Something like real estate. We could have the stability in real estate. We're not going to get 100% loan to value. We probably could get a pretty good loan to value on real estate. So something to consider. We could get the rate of return. It's not going to be tax-free. So there's a couple other assets. So most assets, every asset pretty well can be a good candidate for leveraging if you've got a very high risk tolerance for leverage, except for potentially cash. So all these other assets could potentially be a candidate for leveraging. If you really felt like you had a really high risk tolerance, you could use something like crypto or stocks or real estate for leveraging, but I wouldn't recommend them for your average business owner anyway.
A tax-free, right?
Yeah, the only one that's going to be tax-free is the insurance.
And that's a huge huge plus because it's what tax is the thing that really kills most business owners.
Yeah, it's true. And the tax rate for the business owner is going to be 50% on their passive income. So that 50% to get around that is a pretty big deal. So what we can do over time, we have two choices. So I hope this doesn't complicate things too much. Hopefully that's not famous last words. So we've got our ESBI again. So essentially what we have is we've got two choices. So we want to move, we definitely want to move here. We probably want to move here over time. We don't want to always be self-employed because that's just not a great place to be. It's a little stressful over time. So we've got two options. Number one is that we fully automate this business and we become a true business owner. And that's just whatever pays us our income for the rest of our lives. So we've got a passive income that we built here. So that is possible. And the route that we're going to use to take that is we're going to use all this surplus that we grow in the asset, and we're going to use that as capital expenditures within the business. So we're basically going to grow the business, right? That's route number one. Route number two is that we continue with this, we continue to work in the business, and that money goes over to investments. So again, we put ourselves in a place where we're getting that surplus, and that surplus goes into passive investments. And those passive investments might be investments like we looked at before, might be stocks, might be real estate, might be something like crypto. Probably not cash, because cash, probably you'll have a little bit of cash, but that's not really the way to build up assets over the long term. So either these passive investments generate money for yourself, or you're getting passive income from a business that's automated. And you're doing that by capturing the growth that you're losing in the cash flow by cycling it through an investment. And that investment I would recommend is insurance. You can do whichever you want. You could do stocks, you could do crypto, you could do real estate. There are other options, but I would suggest that this one is the best one.
So Carl, we have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
One says, if going with insurance, who will be issuing the loan to the individual?
So the way there are different ways that we can do this. So say Jessica, we'll get back to her. Say she wants to she's put the money into the insurance and she wants to pull the money back out again. Mm-hmm. So she could either take a loan from the insurance company or she could get the loan from a bank. So I would always recommend getting the loan from the bank, not from the insurance company. We do have the option, and it's good to have that option as a backup, but there are a few reasons for this. And I'm sorry if I'm going into more detail than you expected, but if we get the loan from the insurance company, say and it'll be different for different insurance policies, say for 8 years, you will be able to take that money out tax-free. After that, year 9, 10, 11, now that money is going to be taxed as income. So that's the main reason not to get the loan from the insurance company. The insurance company can pay you out tax-free for a certain amount of time, but over time, that income is going to be taxable. So I gave the example of 8 years. It may not be 8 years, it may be 12 years, it may be 7 years. It depends on the policy, but eventually that income is going to become taxed.
So can you take the money from the insurance company tax-free for the X number of years and then move over to a bank after that?
Yeah, you could convert it over time. That would be an option. If you were in trouble and you weren't able to get the bank loan, I would always recommend the bank loan first, but if you're in a situation where you're having some trouble getting the bank loan, then we can use the insurance company as a backup. The other thing is we're looking at probably, depending on the loan size, probably prime plus 50 basis points, which would be, let's say 4% here. And we're looking at 5.2% here. So the interest that you pay on this loan is much greater than the interest you pay on that loan. I guess it's not a huge difference, but we want to be as efficient with the strategy as we can.
And then Winnie was asking about whether it would be actually 100% loan to value or not.
Yes. 100% loan to value.
Okay. So the question I was thinking about is like, okay, well, you know, if the rate of return is around 4% and the interest rate is probably prime plus 50 basis points, let's say it's around, you know, like 4% right now, then so your rate of return is 4%, but your interest rate is 4%. And then on top of that, inflation is at like 10%. So you're kind of like losing money, right?
Well, when you look at the actual, so let's have a look at that in more detail then. So you're taking your insurance policy and you're making 4% with the insurance policy, right? So that's going to be a tax-free return. Okay, so it's a solid 4%. There's no tax being taken off that. And then when we pay the 4% interest to the bank, that is going to be tax deductible. So because it's tax deductible, that means that we have a 50% tax passive rate within the corporation. We actually net 2% tax that we're paying. So there's an arbitrage between those two, or a spread between those two of 2%. And don't forget, that's 2% on the $100,000 that you're putting in every year, right? So 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. So that's going to go up over time, right? That 2% spread. The first year, it doesn't seem like that much. Okay, there's $100,000 here, and the spread that I make is 2%. So it's only $2,000. But you got to remember that it's 4, then it's 6, then it's 8. And that starts to add up over time, right? You would basically add up all those. What's that? So that's $20,000, right? So over the first couple of years, it may not seem like a lot of money, but over time, it's going to start generating a fair amount, right?
And then we got another question, Carl. Will this
Yep.
make sense if I'm going to need proof of income to apply for a new mortgage with a lender? I'm assuming mortgage lenders won't use money you're borrowing as income to qualify.
So this loan is an insurance loan. And you would have to qualify for this insurance loan. Was your question about a mortgage specifically, or about this insurance loan against the insurance asset?
I can just talk if you guys don't mind. So one thing is, like, for example, if I'm looking to get another place in the next year, obviously the lenders are going to ask me for proof of income, and they're going to need to see that I'm actually employed by myself through my own corporation. So I'm wondering if I go with this strategy so that I can, borrow take out an insurance loan to pay myself and to live off, will the mortgage lenders be okay with that and to approve me for mortgage?
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to have to qualify your question a little bit in that I'm not specifically a mortgage advisor, so I can't necessarily give you specific mortgage advice, but I can give you some more information about this loan that can help answer your question. So when you get the insurance loan, this is done through private banking. As a result, this is a private loan. So this loan does not show up on your credit bureau. So when the mortgage advisor is actually looking at what you've got currently on file, they're not going to be able to see this loan. So you may decide that you want to disclose this loan anyway to your mortgage advisor, or you might be using the same bank for the mortgage and for the loan, in which case the mortgage advisor will know about the loan in that case, but it's up to you to decide exactly what you want to let the mortgage advisor know about and what they don't know about. But this is a private loan, does not show up on a credit bureau.
Yeah, I guess you're just paying yourself. Like normal people would just regularly, you would just you make money, it goes to the corporation and you use the corporation to pay yourself. But instead, this case is it goes to the corporation, you use the money in the corporation to buy this insurance asset, and then you just pay yourself using the insurance asset.
Exactly.
Alone.
Yep. Yeah. And so in a sense, I don't know whether you guys have heard this phrase before, but it's kind of a radical way of pay yourself first, right? Have you ever heard of this term?
Yeah.
So yeah, so essentially the whole idea is pay yourself first. You bring in $100, you pay $10 into some kind of investment, and then you take $90 yourself. So you never really feel the fact that you missed out on that $10 because it's just a regular part of your life that you're always paying yourself first. So in this case, you're just doing a massive pay yourself first. You're bringing in $100, putting that full $100 into the investment, and then borrowing out that $100 for yourself. So it's kind of a radical pay yourself first strategy.
Can that be done month over month? Like, for example, if I pull in 10K every month, can I put 10K in insurance, buy an insurance investment every month, and then take out an additional 10K as a loan, or does it have to be done like annually, or is there a minimum that you actually have to do?
You have to do it annually. And the minimum that you can do with any bank right now is $50,000. So you have to be able to come up with $50,000 to begin with, and then borrow back out against that 50,000. Some people, what we do is we just get them on a plan where they're just putting in 10,000 a month with the thought that in a few years they're going to do this. But from a cash flow perspective, that can hurt a little bit, having that $10,000 going out without being able to borrow back again, right? It is an option to start setting up the plan, but you got to think about whether you can live without that 10,000.
What does the payback for that loan look like? Like, I know people like, the really wealthy people borrow against their investment portfolio, but my understanding is that they never really kind of pay it back and they just kind of die with it.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, actually. And it's something, as you said, a lot of wealthy use this strategy, and it's called buy, borrow, and die. Is that kind of what you were referring to? So there's been a lot in the news recently about this, how billionaires in the US use this strategy. Somebody like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or something like that, they buy their own stock for their own company, they borrow against it for their whole life, and then they die. So they as a person never end up paying any taxes because they've never actually used their own money. So this is very similar to this strategy. Essentially, what you would be doing is buy in the first 10 years, you would be building the investment. So every year for those first 10 years, you'd be putting in the 100K or whatever it is. In our scenario, what would you do is you borrow it out immediately, right? Which is a little bit different from this strategy. Usually they buy first, borrow second, and die third. We want to borrow out the money immediately because we don't have the resources of a Bezos or Musk or somebody like that, right? So we're buying and borrowing at the same time. So we're doing step 1 and step 2 immediately. And then the idea is after 10 years, now year 11 to year, we'll call it 70, maybe we'll be lucky to live that long. Now all we're doing is we're letting it grow, and then we're borrowing any growth. And then we die, and when we die, the insurance pays out the loan. So we would never pay this money back unless we elected to pay the money back. Eventually, maybe we felt uncomfortable with the debt as we got older and we decided to pay it back. But generally speaking, the idea is to use the insurance when we die to pay out the loan. Yeah, so that's the key. Are there any other questions that we should go through?
And then is there a typical recommendation of how much insurance policy you should be purchasing? If you make $100,000 a year, should you be buying this much? If you make $500,000 a year, you should be buying this much. Is there?
Yeah, we generally not want to go much more than 50% of your net income. So this example here, it's a pretty extreme example where you're pulling in 100,000 and you're pulling it out. It just kind of simplifies the whole thing. But say you're making 100,000 in the corporation, it's more comfortable to use $50,000 for this strategy and then $50,000 just in regular cash.
So Selena had a question. I thought the insurance company's requirement is 20% of your net income.
No, you can do more than that.
Oh. And is there a reason why it would not be feasible? Like, let's say you make $100,000 a year. Why would it be a bad idea to put buy $100,000 insurance policy if you can borrow the money right out?
So there's a few reasons. Say you were making $100,000 a year, and say you really needed that $100,000 to live on. There is some interest charges here. There's maybe $2,000 in the first year, $4,000 in the second year. If you weren't able to survive on $98,000 in that year or $96,000 in this year, you may not, or if your business income is not going to increase to 105 to 110 over time, eventually this strategy is probably not going to be sustainable for you. So you want some prospect that your business is going to grow over time. So that's number one. You want some kind of growth. And the way this works is we need some stability too. So number two is stability. If your income is 100,000 this year, and maybe next year it's 30,000, and then the next year we're back up to 150, And then we're at 110, and then we're back down at 20,000. If you've got an income pattern like that, this strategy is probably not going to make sense for you because you may be in a situation where you're not able to cover the insurance so that you can pull the loan back out again. So we want some kind of stability in income, and we want some kind of prospects of growth for the company over time. And it doesn't have to be crazy growth, but we want to expect maybe a 5% growth rate of the company over time to make sure that it always remains sustainable. And we want a stability of kind of 90%. So it doesn't have to be 100,000 every year, but we want it to be kind of 100,000, 90,000, 110,000. Maybe you dip down to 85,000 and then you're up to 130. If you had that kind of cash flow pattern, that would work. But we just don't want these wild swings in your income, right? We could make this work. We could figure out a way to make things work. Essentially, what we would really like is 100,000, 105,000, 110,000, 115,000. That would be a really beautiful cash pattern that we could use to make it work, right?
Great, great. Any other questions?
Just one final one from me. So it doesn't sound like it makes sense to do this until you're turning over at least $100,000 a year within the corporation, so that and you can put 50% of it into this. So for anybody who's kind of like at a lower level, like just say for example, if you're turning over anywhere between the $50,000 to that $100,000, is there other investment areas that you would put your corporate revenue into to grow that and help it grow a little bit faster year over year by a couple percentages versus just relying on active income from services rendered?
So if you had a little bit of a surplus, are you saying?
Yeah, like, for example, the business turns over $10,000 a month, and there's like a surplus of $1,000 or $2,000 that's not being used for anything. Because it sounds like in order to even get into this, you need like the amount you need to qualify is like $50,000 basically. So until you have that kind of package saved up, it's like, what do I do with the smaller increments leading up to it?
Generally speaking, with most investments, if we go back to our investment chart here, what we generally do with a business balance sheet is we treat it like any other portfolio in my thinking. So this is the way that I would recommend this. We look at any other kind of portfolio and we look at different asset classes within that portfolio. So when you look at what you're holding in your business, you're going to have the choice of a few different assets. So one of those assets might be insurance, but there's a certain, as you already recognize, there's a certain level that you want to get to before employing insurance as part of this mix, right? There's also, again, there's stocks. There's something like crypto. And there's real estate. And sorry, I need one more.
Private equity, venture capital.
Yeah, there's private equity.
FX.
But importantly, there's cash. So I drew cash as a very small wedge here. It's probably a much larger wedge. Probably like this wedge is going to be more like the cash wedge. This is probably going to be more like the stocks wedge. But anyway, this is not proportional. But the idea is what we do is we create what's called a cash wedge. So that there's a certain part of your portfolio that's going to have to cover 6 months or 1 quarter, maybe 3 months, depending on your business, of operations. So that's what you need to make sure first, that you've got that cash that's going to cover 3 to 6 months of operations. And then you can start looking into different assets like stocks, real estate, private equity, crypto, insurance.
Yeah, I also recommend that for my clients. I usually tell them you want to have 6 months of savings, at least like a rainy day fund. And I tell them to use Wealth Simple. And that's something that my financial mentor taught me as well. So yeah, that's definitely one of the tools that like I use myself, and a lot of people I know use that.
Yeah, so I'm giving you these numbers, and Gary is also the 3-6 months. We don't specifically know the cash flow of your business. We don't really know the risks that you're taking with your business. This number might be 12 months of cash flow that has to be set aside. If you're somebody like a doctor, they have a very consistent business. Maybe it's 1 month that they have to have set aside, right? So it varies a lot from business to business. 6 is a number that you hear out there a lot, and I think it probably makes sense for the majority of businesses, but in your specific situation, that number might be a lot different, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I definitely probably like for specific tailored advice about like, oh, what should I do in my specific situation? Feel free to give Carl a call, or also give me a call. I'm not an insurance specialist, but in terms of wealth building, I can either point you to the right person, or I can give you some advice on what I do myself. See if it works for you, right?
But yeah, me personally, for my business, I have a number of different assets inside my business. It's not just insurance, it's not just cash. I have a number of different assets. And one thing that you can do, just as an aside, if you're very aggressive and you really like risk, one thing that you can do is you can say, take your $100,000 of insurance, you can leverage that $100,000, and you can, so let's borrow. That $100,000 can go into investments, and then you can borrow again against that, probably $50,000, depending on the investments that you're putting the money in. So this isn't something I would recommend for most people, but say you wanted to be super aggressive and you love risk, you could take the insurance, borrow against it, put it in investments, borrow it against it again, and then you could use that $50,000 for whatever you wanted to use. So again, I'm not recommending this to anybody, but just give you an idea of different ways that you can use these strategies, and you can start to piece them together a little bit.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much, Carl. I can't wait to hear you share about the next topic next month, and like you've been adding tremendous value. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to Carl directly, or if you have any like real estate or just basic wealth management questions, you can always reach out to me. And I work with different like experts in wealth management, so I can definitely point you in to somebody, as well as give you resources as well.